boredom in recovery used to absolutely terrify me, you know, and even when I was in active addiction, being bored was not something that I ever entertained. But I've learned that boredom is one of the most useful tools that we have at our disposal as creative people in recovery. And generally, I think in society, we need to embrace boredom more. Creative people, myself included, often mistake boredom for emptiness. We mistake it for, you know, there's a lot of shame carried around boredom now, I think, you know, because you see people in the cafes, you see people on the bus, you see people on the train, you see people waiting on a street corner, and they don't feel like they're able to just wait, you know. Apparently waiting now is not an activity in and of itself. It's something that we should shy away from. It's something that we should be ashamed of, you know, because God forbid that we're just left with our own thoughts for a couple of minutes of the day whilst we wait for someone to arrive, whilst we wait for the bus to turn up or anything like that, you know. We have to be constantly entertained. We have to be constantly consumed by, well, the top and bottom of it is we have to be consumed by the things that we have in our pocket, which is our phone, you know. My phone is my biggest enemy at the moment, and I know that it is for a lot of other creative people as well. The thing about boredom, right, is that it is the place where all of the best ideas come from. And so we need to reframe what boredom actually is, you know. Boredom is a strange one because it's the absence of activity, but as an activity itself, not doing anything is really, really important. As soon as we start to do something, we interrupt that kind of flow of thinking about being creative. You know, as soon as my phone is in my hand, as soon as I'm on social media, as soon as I'm watching content, whether it's terrible short form video content or intelligent long form video content on YouTube, you know, there is no difference. We need space away from that in order to be creative. And as an artist working now in recovery, the worst thing that I invite into my studio every day when I come through that door is distraction. You know, that is the biggest killer of creativity. It's the biggest killer of me getting into the zone and allowing, you know, that flow state to arrive, allowing inspiration to come in. If I'm obsessed with my phone, you know, looking at things, then my antenna is not in a receptive state. I need to be away from those things to enable that energy to come and work through me. You know, on the painting that I'm working on now, for example, on the drawings that I'm working on now, for example, on the writing that I'm working on now, as another example. One key point that we really need to touch on today is the difference between thinking and doing. They are two separate processes. And once we've got distraction out of the way, which is the enemy for sure, you know, and we're in this state where we are allowing ourselves to be bored, we really need to think about the difference between thinking and doing. You know, for me, doing is a very instinctive process that comes from thinking, and then thinking comes from doing, and they bounce off each other in this kind of cyclic way. But I don't think that we can do them at the same time, and so we need space to think about things creatively. And then once we've thought about them and we've made some decisions, we need space to enact those decisions, to realize those decisions, to materialize those decisions in the studio, in our homes, our bedrooms, wherever it is we're being creative. I don't think we can do both at the same time. I think doing both at the same time, trying to think whilst doing, is counterproductive. In my own painting practice, for example, oil painting, I have to think very carefully about what I'm going to do. Because if I don't, then I end up stood in front of my canvas, you know, dabbing away, doing this, doing that, you know, not really thinking big picture. And so the boredom is really important to allow that thinking to happen. You know, there have been times in recovery where I've been sat in boredom, and I force myself to sit in boredom, you know. If like, sometimes when I'm at a cafe now, and this is like such a countercultural thing, just sit there and drink my coffee, you know, like what the hell? How strange is that in this day and age? How often do you see someone just sat in a cafe, in a, you know, a restaurant or whatever, eating, or sat down in a park or doing nothing. You very rarely see that, you know. And kind of the creative way to pass our free time in those moments now is like reading a book, for example, which of course has some utility, but you know, there are times like when I've sat in total boredom, and I'm not some like superhero at doing this, by the way. I'm still in the struggle, as we all are. But you know, it's like to sit there in boredom, things just arrive in your head, and you know, you don't intend them to, and you can't know what's going to arrive, and you can't know when it's going to arrive. But they do. Ideas emerge, and so a really important creative practice, I think, is just to sit in boredom, perhaps with a little notebook. But the idea of the exercise is not to write loads of stuff. The idea of the exercise is to sit and think. And when something really striking arrives, which it will do eventually, then we write it down, and then we can start to think and expand that idea and do a bit of work on it, you know, going back to that idea of thinking versus doing. And so if you are in early recovery, boredom does feel frustrating at first. It feels hard because it is hard, you know. The easy option these days is to reach for the phone, is to reach for the TV remote, the thing you change the channel with, whatever you call that. You know, it is just listen to a podcast. It is to pick up a book even, you know, or it is to, when I was in addiction, it was to reach for a drink and a drug and a party and all those things. And now it's not like that. So it will be frustrating at first, but I can assure you it is totally worth it to just sit there with a coffee or a cup of tea or a nice cold drink, whatever it might be, and think, you know, and not always think, but just to let things arrive. And boredom, truthfully, has led to some very surprising creative breakthroughs for me. And the thing is, if I hadn't been bored, if I hadn't been in those spaces where I wasn't doing something, then those ideas never would have arrived. We're in this age now, it's right on the start of this, you know, really all-consuming digital age. And it has been an absolute nightmare for creative thinking, for any kind of creative practice. You know, so I would really suggest that you think deeply about how often you're allowing yourself to be bored throughout the day. You know, boredom is not the enemy. It's the doorway to the next idea. And through that doorway, we can then start this process of thinking, of then doing, of then thinking, of then doing, and then allowing ourselves to be bored again. So yeah, be bored. You know, there's nothing wrong with being bored. It's something I still really struggle with, you know. It's something I have to work on every day, allowing myself to be bored, because I am my own worst critic. And I appreciate that a lot of you watching this will be your own worst critics as well. But we need to be certain that boredom is a good thing, it's not a bad thing. So yeah, call to action for today. Be bored, allow yourself the space to be bored. If you catch a train or a bus, or you're waiting for someone, perhaps do it without the music on, perhaps do it without the earphones in, you know, the earbuds, whatever the hell they're called. Perhaps do it without a podcast on, perhaps do it without a book, you know, just for 10 minutes and see what you notice, see what you see what you smell, see what you hear, see what you can feel, you know, bring that awareness into the present moment, and then just allow it to happen, you know. So yeah, that's me. If you've enjoyed this video, leave me a comment, let me know. It's always really helpful. I'm going to keep banging on about it, but I have started this space now called Creating Sobriety, new community for people to connect with other like-minded individuals who are in recovery. Yeah, as I've said, I found that I've got my recovery community and I've got my creative community, and I really want to start to bring those two things together. So if you are someone who's sober curious or in recovery or struggles with addiction in whatever shape it might take, and you're also creative, whether you're an artist, a poet, a writer, a musician, an actor, a singer, a dancer, whatever it is, photographer, then yeah, hit me up. Be good to connect with you. Thanks.